Thanks, Crystal. Thanks, Jeff. Good morning. Wow. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of Creative Mornings Fargo. And thank you to all of the volunteers who are here making this possible. What a fantastic theme. Ripple. It's gorgeous, right? There are so many possibilities with this word. I think it's probably no accident that the Creative Morning folks choose themes that are both nouns and verbs. You can kind of go anywhere with them. I also imagine that around the world today, other audiences might be hearing talks about astrophysics or supply chain theory, cryptocurrency, or Buddhism. For me, what I love about it is that it has these endless possibilities. It's such a rich metaphor. Human beings seem to understand this innately and use the term in a lot of different ways. For me, of course, I always think about ripple effect. Ripple effect has so many possibilities too. One of the things that I love about it is this notion of motion and the notion of cause and effect, except that it's not a direct line. It is multidimensional. It moves in 360 degrees. And the unsatisfying part about that is that it moves away, and often we don't actually know what the effects are. They are out there somewhere. But the thing that I wanted to talk about today, even though I thought for a long time about this, I mean, this was a gorgeous opportunity for me to ponder ripple and all of the ways that I experience this metaphor, particularly after this last year, I think, where we all feel a sense that there are real ripple effects of the things we do or don't do that do have effects we can see in unusual ways. But eventually I had to settle on giving a talk that really was about things that I know. I can't philosophize forever about ripple. I'm going to talk about the ripple effect of the arts. So why am I talking about this? Well, first of all, who am I? As Crystal noted, I'm executive director of a theater company here in Fargo-Moorhead, and there's a little bit of background that might be important to understand why I do that. So first of all, I am an identical twin. This is something many people don't necessarily know about me. I'm an identical twin, and to me that means that empathy and attachment are literally in my DNA. I am also the youngest of 7 children, and so performing and entertaining others was very highly encouraged. I received lots of positive reinforcement for that. My twin and I were preemies, and as a consequence, we had a lot of health issues when we were very young, and Kathy died when we were 6. I was just old enough to understand loss, and just young enough to be really resilient, especially considering how her loss actually made me all that much more extraordinary to the rest of my family. But luckily, this was tempered a little bit by being educated by nuns. That means that I became a very well-behaved activist with excellent penmanship. So these are just some of the traits that prepared me for who I would be as an adult and who I would be when I arrived in Fargo-Moorhead more than 20 years ago. A well-behaved activist with excellent penmanship, a strong connection to my family, an appreciation and a gratitude for being alive, and a desire to change the world through art. I have to admit that I struggled a bit at first when I arrived here in Fargo-Moorhead. On the bright side, my husband had a great job. We had these 2 beautiful, healthy kids. And our living in Fargo-Moorhead meant that we had proximity to our aging parents, and that was really important to me. But on the other hand, I had a newly minted MFA in acting, my equity points, and a respectable resume. And no actor moves to Fargo to make it in their career, and so I have to admit I felt a bit like a failure for a number of years. But that sense of dissatisfaction is actually what propelled me to, with some friends, start a theater company. So with my husband, David Wintersteen, Lori and Scott Horvick, our friends, and some recent graduates, including Michael Sunrem, who is still with us today, Amber Bernhardt, who is in Bismarck, and Adam Harfield, who is in the cities, we started Theater B. We dropped a pretty big pebble in the waters of Fargo-Moorhead. All right, so Theater B. An interesting thing to understand about Theater B is that early on, we were incredibly itinerant, mobile. And I want to talk a little bit about the ripple effects of our work in this town. But I think I need to kind of pull it down a little bit. And so I'm going to look at our effects on the economy, our effects on artist opportunity, and our effects on building empathy. So, the economy. Pardon me. In general, the effect of the arts on the economy in a national context. Before the pandemic, the Bureau of Economic Analysis established that arts and creativity are a $730 billion industry. For those of you who may not know, that represents 4.2% of the US GDP. That is actually more than transportation, tourism, construction, even agriculture. That's how big the sector is and the kind of ripple effects that that can have on an economy. In terms of job creation, the Economic Policy Institute a number of years ago established that for every 100 jobs invested in the arts, there are 378 jobs created in other industries. So just think about how that can translate in a small local economy. For us, locally, according to our most recent economic impact study that was commissioned by the Arts Partnership in association with Americans for the Arts, which have been doing these economic impact studies in small and large communities and nationally now for years, the arts have a $41 million impact in Fargo-Moorhead and West Fargo. The spending of arts patrons, for example, is almost $20 per person, not including the tickets. So when people go out to an arts event, for example, they're spending nearly $20 on gas or hotels, meals, gifts. That's a huge economic impact. And in the year of 2015, over $1 million of tax revenue was brought into the cities of Fargo, Moorhead, and West Fargo by patrons of the arts. So that's the economic picture. From Theater B's standpoint, what that looked like was we took a building that looked like this and made it look like that. And we did it with $1,000 out of our savings. Literally, that is the budget Theater B had in its first year. that building looked like this at the time. A few years later, it looked like this. So we were itinerant after that building was, condemned and bought and getting refurbished. It was the beginning of Fargo's downtown renaissance. So we did shows in the fire hall. We moved again over to Main Avenue. And I may not have time for it in the presentation, but if you want to ask me about it, I can tell you how this ripple effect is what brought us Thai food in Fargo-Moorhead. Eventually, we moved on to this, which of course also doesn't exist. And eventually here, into this beautiful little old school gymnasium in Moorhead. And everywhere we've gone, the neighborhood around it has grown up, and we hope that it will happen in Moorhead too. The other thing that's important to recognize about the economic impact of a tiny organization like ours. So even though we started with only $1,000, we now have actually a relatively modest budget of around $300,000 per year, and that's small by arts organization standards. But what's significant to me is when I looked at it for this particular talk, I started to measure what our economic impact has been and realized that in the last 10 years, we as a tiny organization have actually brought into Fargo-Moorhead over $1 million in funding from funders outside of our region. So funders like the Bush Foundation and the McKnight Foundation, the Schubert Foundation. This one, I am particularly proud of the Schubert Foundation. The Schubert Foundation funds arts organizations, theaters and dance organizations around the country, and Theater B is the first and only theater from the state of North Dakota to receive this funding. And we still do, every year. And the American Theater Wing. This one I'm also particularly proud of because, for those of you who may not know, the American Theater Wing is the producer of the Tony Awards. And one of their mottos is that Broadway is 3,000 miles long. And to prove this, they have a particular award for young theater companies that show particular promise in their communities. And in 2014, Theater B won that award. Just one of the ways that we have a ripple effect of sharing community pride. It was pretty fun to be a Fargo theater in New York receiving this award with other small theaters from around the country. So those are some of the economic impacts of even a tiny organization like mine. And I have to say, when I think about that, I also think about, oh my goodness, if that's the kind of impact that Theater B can have, just imagine what our flagship organizations are doing. Imagine the impact of the Plains Art Museum, or the Fargo-Moorhead Symphony, or Trollwood Performing Arts School, or the Fargo Theater, which right now has this beautiful film festival. The economic impact of that must be huge compared to ours. And the other beauty about this ripple effect in the arts is that our success at Theater B hasn't meant that anyone else's success diminishes. Creativity is incredibly cooperative. It really is, once again, to sort of stretch our metaphor about ripple and water, the rising tide floats all the boats. So for Theater B, the way that this shows up for us is in creative opportunity. And it's particularly for us, we felt challenged to make new work. How could we actually contribute to the American theater canon? Could we have that kind of an impact? It also is for us in connections and relationships and networks that get created. And of course, we've also had a number of years where education has been particularly important to us. And not just that we provide it, but how we provide it. That's different from some of the other organizations in town. So in terms of new work, Oh, well, we have had the pleasure of working with local playwrights, with national playwrights, international playwrights, poets, adapters. We've brought to Fargo-Moorhead some world premieres. And what a rare treat that is. I don't think Fargo-Moorhead audiences actually realize just how rare that is. In terms of our connections and relationships, we kind of think of ourselves as like an MFA program that's hands-on. We have fabulous college theater programs here in this town, but there's a missing step, and Theater B has been able to help fill that niche. When students graduate from the local colleges, they come and they start to do some work with us, and it prepares them better for larger markets where they might work, and it prepares them better for graduate school. But the thing that I want to point to most that's kind of rare and special is some of those relationships that I can't necessarily say these people are all richer and more famous for being here, but I think they are more rich for having fostered and developed relationships in our theater. Students. So I mentioned that students in this town have a lot of educational opportunities, and Theater B offers them something slightly different. At Theater B, we are really intent on creating ensemble and using the safety of that group to encourage artistic stretch. And so for us, there are so many students I could name who've benefited from our programming. Students who could be their true selves while they were with us in the summer. Students who really struggled during the school year, and then in the summer, because they were part of a nurturing ensemble, they really blossomed. Their parents, for example, they credit us in some cases with saving their kids' lives. One mom wrote, "Theater B and Beat has saved our lives. It's been a lifesaver to our daughter and our family. It's given her a place to be accepted and to grow, and we will forever be grateful for you guys." But I do have to say that I think there's one student who summed it up in particularly well. His name is Robie, and he is from Lignite, North Dakota, Burke Central School, tiny school out in northwestern North Dakota. And he wrote this. He actually wrote this to me. He wrote this to me in a letter because the funding for the North Dakota Governor's School was going to be cut by the state legislature. And so many young people flooded the legislature with letters about the governor's school that they actually began to reconsider. Unfortunately, the performing arts stayed on the cutting block. But this is what Robie wrote. "For a whole 6 weeks, I was surrounded by new people in a new place, and I was asked to do something that I thought was impossible: create an original performance with 14 others. Now, I was not, in capital letters, not, a creator in any sense of the word before we began, but I was led into a situation that asked that of me every day. It was hard at first, but everyone was so supportive and pushed me to do better. Every day, we made something new. We did something new. And I learned that you start to find purpose in your work if you invest yourself in it. I learned life lessons that I will use every day in my life: to always demand more of myself, that you never truly fail, and that when you're creating with the people around you, you grow close. You become a family. Theater, I know now, is so much more than the end result that the audience sees, and the audience may never know that. But we get to walk away every day knowing that we did this ourselves. We made this ourselves. We made people think about the world around them and how they affect each other in the real world. We managed to make change, and that is something that will never be taken away from me. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the ripple effect of the arts in terms of empathy. I get letters all the time about people's personal revelations, surprises that they've had at the theater. But I also think there are ways in which these personal revelations and discoveries, these epiphanies that people have, can sometimes lead to cultural shift. We take on really tough stories. We've taken on child sexual abuse, economic inequality, hate crime, and LGBTQ rights. We've taken on cancer, the death of children, aging, and PTSD. I had a mother, a Marine mom, write to me about this. This picture you can see is our production of Re-Entry. And here's what she wrote. Hello. This past Sunday, my husband and I attended Re-Entry at the Fargo Legion. I was so emotional when it was over. My son and daughter and son-in-law all returned from overseas at different points in the last 6 months. I was so emotional when it was over that I couldn't say thank you to the cast. The show was absolutely amazing and powerful. My 3 Marines are all dealing with different types of PTSD, and Re-Entry touched on it all and helped me understand a little bit more about what's going on. I've recommended Re-Entry to our Marine Moms support group, so hopefully a few of them can attend on the 20th. Thank you. I get letters like that all the time, and it's really delightful. And I must say that for us, those projects that touch people like that are most successful when we also have a community partner working with us. It makes sure that we do the work right and that the audience whose story is being validated, those people are in the audience. So back for a moment to the notion that sometimes the ripple effect metaphor is unsatisfying. The ripple effects go out, and sometimes we don't get letters. We don't know whether or not our work has been successful. But in preparing for this talk, I had to think about all of these stories, and my husband reminded me that bird by bird, and leave some of my darlings on the floor, and I had to determine which stories really reminded me, really were evidence of the ripple effect that my little venture, our little venture, has had in our community. And I actually had one of these beautiful ripples coming back to me happen just last winter before we had our unexpected hiatus. There's a patron that we have, and I recognized her name from seeing it on our patron lists for years and years. And she drives all the way from Wilmot, South Dakota. But I had never met her in years. And for those of you who do know me in town, or for those of you who don't, I'm fairly forward. I really like to know my patrons. I realized last year when we were starting to talk about having to behave differently because there was this virus out there. And I was hugging everyone who came in the door of the theater, and I had a board member say, you know, you might need to stop that. And I thought, oh my gosh. Anyway, so this patron that I had never met was sneaking out the back door because it's closer to the parking lot, and was sort of, you know, oh, is it okay if I do? I said, of course. But first, please, tell me who you are. And when she said her name, I realized exactly who she was. And I said, oh my goodness, I finally have a chance to ask. Why do you drive all the way from South Dakota? What is it that you love about Theater B? And the story she had to share was a real surprise to me. She said, the very first show we ever saw at Theater B, and when she says we, it's her and her retired mother. They make a date of it. The first show we saw was next fall. And when the lights went down and we realized that it was about a gay couple, we were a little uncomfortable at first. We even thought about leaving at intermission, but then there wasn't an intermission. And by the end of the play, we were so invested in the characters and their story, we really wanted them to have a happy ending. And we got into the car and we talked about it the whole way home and realized that the show, it changed how we thought about homosexual relationships. We were so glad we stayed. Next fall was 8 years ago. Talk about a long time to wait to know whether or not your work is having an effect. 8 years. 8 years she remembered that title. 8 years she remembered how it made her feel. That's a long time, and that's a lot of empathy. So, the ripple effect of the arts. It's economic growth, it's creative expression, it's more things than I can actually name. And part of the reason that I was so interested in addressing it as a part of my Ripple talk was because I think in this particular year, we are so aware of that notion of ripple effects. It's often, these days, really easy to see negative ripple effects. And we have to trust that positive ripple effects are out there too. We have to be positive. We have to keep creating. We have to create space for people to feel deeply, to see other people's experiences, to exercise their empathy muscle. And I have to say that I have no idea what our true ripple effects of my little organization are going to be long term, but I can tell you, it seems like downtown Fargo has grown up a lot. New plays got written. They didn't just get written, they got produced, they got published. They're being seen by other audiences. Students have found their cohort. In some cases, their calling. Women who've been victims found connection and healing. Veterans opened up to their families. Doctors asked, how can we serve our patients better? Actors got paid. Our gay friends got married. And many, many, many people had a great evening out, or a shocking discovery, or a rich discussion with a first date or a lifelong friend. But these are the things I want to leave you with. It's Robie's words again. When I think about the ripple effect of the arts, you start to find purpose in your work if you invest yourself in it. I learned life lessons that I will use every day in my life, to always demand more of myself, that you never truly fail, and that when you're creating with the people around you, you grow close, you become a family.